Hello, partners, hello, customers, and hello, all fans of technology, cybersecurity trends. It is your old pal and host of the Akamai Partner Champions podcast, Nick Watkins. Now, I've got a great episode in store for you today, but before I begin, I want to give you my favorite dad joke. Now, here it is. Ready? I know you guys tune in for dad jokes and not just cybersecurity trends and partnership stories. Really, the dad jokes are why you come. So, the joke is, how do you catch a unique rabbit? Well, unique up on him. But see, this is why this is one of my favorites, because it's a two-parter. Now, how do you catch a tame rabbit? Tame way. Yeah, I know. Tell your kids this one tonight. It's a classic, so you know what? I highly recommend it. But the reason I wanted to open with that dad joke is because there's a little bit of a sound alike there, because I interview Clinton Herget from Snyk. And this partnership, it is setting the world on fire right now. Our partners are very excited to learn about this new integration between Akamai API security and Snyk's DAST platform. And so I wanted to open the show before I actually cut to the official interview is a quick call to action for everybody who's watching this. After you get done with the episode, after you get all these key learnings, check out the webinars and the different pieces that we have going on with Snyk, because we've done at least 3 to 4 webinars this month in September. And so if you look down in the YouTube description, check out some of those webinars. We have everything from deep dives on the platform to nice, heady, philosophical conversations between Yora Engel on our side as well as Clinton on the Snyk side. So this is a great episode. Just wanted to make sure we get that in and enjoy the episode. Welcome, partners, to the Akamai Partner Champions podcast. I am your host, Nick Watkins, and it is my distinct pleasure and honor to welcome our guest from Snyk, Clinton Herget. Clinton, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much, Nick. Glad to be here.
I'm looking forward to our chat today. We've got a lot of exciting things to talk about, but let's start where all good stories start, right at the very beginning. Can you start by telling us a little bit about Snyk as a company, your role, and what made you want to work for Snyk?
Yeah, of course. Well, first of all, thank you for pronouncing it correctly. It is like a pair of sneakers or sneaking around. We get all variations of those 4 letters. It is also an acronym, by the way. It stands for So Now You Know.
So now I know.
So hopefully at the end of this half hour or so, I'll know a little bit more about Snyk and Akamai. But really, so we're an application security platform, and we try to look at everything from the perspective of the software developer, right? So we originally credit ourselves with coining the term developer security as a new way of thinking about application security, less from the reactive perspective and more proactively, what can developers do to take more responsibility, right? More empowerment over the risk they're introducing into their software. And particularly now with the rise of AI, the act of software development is so rapidly changing, right? We sit here in the fall of 2025 and now every developer is using AI coding assistants, right? We're getting more into AI native development, which means that fundamentally the security tools have to track to keep up with this rapidly changing developer experience. So we see ourselves more these days as an AI trust platform, because if AI is the critical component for accelerating software development, trust is the missing ingredient, right? Particularly from that perspective of the developer. So it probably won't surprise you to find out that I came up as a developer originally, right? I was a LAMP stack software engineer way back in the day, wrote a lot of really insecure PHP. And so I come at these questions purely from this developer experience perspective. Got into engineering management for a while, learned a lot about the ways developers interact with our work and that particular kind of mental agility you need as an engineer, which actually I think makes you a poor fit for interacting with security. The way a risk manager needs to think is just fundamentally different than the thought process of an engineer.
Right.
And that's why we see so much tension between developer teams on the one side and security on the other. It's not that either of them is wrong. It's that they're fundamentally speaking different languages, right? And tooling is not going to solve that cultural problem. So a lot of what we try to do at Snyk is think about how we can implement cultural change within an organization to get developers thinking more about the risk they're introducing in software and to get security professionals thinking more about the developer experience, which again, sort of rapidly changing. So I'm the field CTO for North America, so I report right up to Danny Allen, our Chief Technology Officer. And I think I have the best job in the company, honestly, because I think almost exclusively about the future of the industry. I think about our strategic vision around developer security, around AI trust, but really about what bets are we making in the market, not for the problems that we're solving for our customers today, but in the problems they're going to have in 2 years and in 5 years, and how do we map to that, and how do we make the right investments and the right bets to bear that out. So excited to talk to you more about that today.
Yeah, I mean, the word that comes to mind is empowerment, right? Like the way that you guys empower developers, I think is so impressive, because historically it's just been been such an underserved market, right? I mean, it feels like everyone's either pitching to the CISOs, the CIOs, and it's just like to get that ground level, of feedback and support and really catering to that audience, I think gives you guys a really cool, unique spot in the market. And so I think that's just why I'm so excited that we're partnered up now, because I think this is just something that could be game changing, right? So
yeah,
I think
absolutely. Well, I think it's natural to say, look, you're going to follow the money, right? The CISO owns the budget. That's who's going to own the security tools. But who's implementing them? And in what kind of workflow and with what surfaces? And how are those people thinking about the introduction of risk? And how can we create a tool that actually drives adoption, right? I think most security tools fail not because the technology is necessarily poor, but because organizations don't adopt them, right? They buy a tool to fix a cultural problem, but they don't think about how do we re-engineer our people to be thinking differently and interacting with each other differently the way they need to understand what their role is in creating that risk. And those are the problems I really love to solve.
Oh, and so few people are doing it. And so it's fun when you can actually pitch that and then actually tell people like we're one of the first, we're one of the people that are in that space. And so I just think, again, it makes total sense why we're partners. And so I'm very excited about the future of the partnership.
Likewise.
So I was curious, I think we already talked about what makes Snyk unique in the market, so I think we've covered that very well. But I want to talk a little bit about customer success, because I think without customers, obviously, we wouldn't be here talking on podcasts and talking about things. But I'd be curious, can you share an example of a complex security challenge that you've helped a customer overcome? What was the issue, and how did Snyk's solution address it?
Well, I'll tell you about a lot of the issues we run into. And again, on that theme of kind of cultural disparity within organizations, right? Often we'll ask, a CISO or someone in the AppSec profession, what are your developers' biggest challenges with adopting tools? And they don't know, right? And it's not because they are, ignorant, right? It's like they've never bothered to think about the problem from that lens. So really what we're able to do is come in and create a paradigm shift. And we try to do that, by the way, in the pre-sale process itself, and actually say, we are not going to sell this tool to you unless you get buy-in from your developer community and from your engineering managers. So this is something that's going to make their lives easier. So immediately we're thinking about selling security not as a risk management function, which it is, of course, right? But how do you think about security as an accelerator for developers? How do you think about speeding them up instead of slowing them down? Not this is the softest stick we can possibly hit you with, right? But this is actually a carrot. This enables you to get more of the work done that you are actually interested in and incentivized on, by the way. Because I've yet to meet an organization that gives its developers meaningful incentives for risk reduction, right? But if we can come in with that mindset and say, how can we enable you to take more, use the word empowerment, right? To take more empowerment, more responsibility over security from the beginning and make you the primary assessors of that tool. How well does it integrate to the entire breadth of your SDLC, right? Not we're going to put up one big scary security gate and everybody's going to need to be terrified of it, but we're going to have lightweight checkpoints going all the way back to when a developer has their hands on the keyboard, right? Inside the IDE. And not, by the way, say, you've been a very bad boy or girl because you introduced something bad, now figure it out, but say, here's how you could do this better, right? So it's reframing that relationship in terms of developer experience, which is the kind of thing I nerd out about, right? How can we make engineers more able to do their jobs and what they're good at, right? Which is solving interesting problems, not putting their hands on the keyboard and writing code, right? That happens to be the tool we use to do it, which is changing as we speak, by the way. But the reason you hire an engineer is because you encounter something that you don't immediately know how to solve. So you can't automate that problem away. Often that's a security issue. The problem, though, is we don't test those applications for security until it's too late. You have to have built something before often you can determine if there's a risk in it or not, right? But that's fundamentally backwards. The point at which you want to know if I'm introducing a risk is when I'm doing it the first time, not force me to guess and then tell me afterward that I did something wrong. It's reversing that paradigm that I think is the real power in our approach to application security.
No, absolutely. I mean, it's funny, even the evolution over the last few years, where it's like, I remember we used to talk about shift left, and like, what do you mean by that? And so you have to explain it. But now it's like, shift left is such a common colloquialism in what we do. And I think platforms like Snyk have popularized.
Well, I certainly think we were behind getting that phraseology into the market in a way that is now certainly a marketable term, right? Now that's a double-edged sword. Everybody says shift left just like everybody says AI, but what do you mean by it? I like to differentiate shifting left from throwing left. I think there's a lot we've thrown to the left, right? But just because something can be a developer responsibility doesn't mean it should be, right? We've taken the responsibility for security and saying, developers, you have to test earlier. But what we haven't haven't meaningfully done is say, you now have the context to understand the decisions you're making better so that you can make better ones over time. Like, is this application even going to get deployed? When it is deployed, what kind of network infrastructure is sitting in front of it, right? Does it have ingress from the outside world? What's the business criticality level of this asset that I'm deploying it into? What operating system is it running on? All of these things matter when I'm addressing a vulnerability. But if all I see is this is a CVSS 9 and that's it, that's all you get to know, that's very different from saying, here's all of the risk factors I'm looking at and communicating to you the importance and the priority of this issue, and here's what you can do about it, right? This is the remediation we're recommending to get you from a find to a find and fix mindset, which is the other thing we can do with organizations is really bring them to a world in which security is about that full lifecycle process of remediation, not just about identifying things and continuing to grow the size of your backlog. That is not a meaningful metric for the success of your security tool. Call me crazy.
Oh, very, very well said. I think this is a good opportunity then because we talked a little bit about some of the different audiences that we have to talk to. And, speaking of audiences, our audience is largely partners and customers. And so I think for the partners out there, I'd love to talk a little bit about how they identify joint opportunities. And so, look, selling application security, it's complex. We talked a little bit about we've got to pitch the overall security message to the CISO, but then we actually have to make sure that what we're pitching to the developer level, that they make sense for them. And so, given that decision-making resides in multiple departments, what advice would you give to those Akamai and Snyk partners out there that are really looking to identify joint opportunities where, hey, this partnership, this adds a lot of value. I want to come in with this. What would be your recommendation there?
Yeah, absolutely. I think if you're dealing with a customer where there is a little bit of a disconnect in those two communication styles, right? Developers are saying we can't utilize these tools, and security is saying, why aren't you utilizing our tools more? Yeah. That's where a Snyk, I think, can really help, right? Because we can say, not just address kind of some of those cultural concerns, but say, here's how you shift left more meaningfully, right? Here's how you provide the right context in the developer surface where they need it. Maybe that's their traditional IDE, but maybe it's something like a Copilot or a Gemini or a Cursor where they're primarily interacting with an AI agent, which changes the game in terms of their workflow and in terms of the risk that they're introducing. Now, that doesn't mean that we say, well, we're a one-stop shop and all you need to do is developer security. There's tons of opportunities to combine that with meaningful sources of context, like we're doing with DAST, right? With Akamai, finding the API endpoints that developers might not even be aware of in order to meaningfully run scans against them. But that extends all the way to the left and to the right, by the way. Understanding your cloud context is really important to know what is the priority level of something I'm remediating. Going into the business and saying, what is the existential risk associated with these services? What happens if they go down? So I know how to classify them. Yeah. But then how do you bring all of that and package it so that you're integrating with the sort of problem-solving loop of a developer? Often, and I talk to a lot of CISOs, people who have been in security their whole career, and it can sometimes blow their mind when I talk through what the day-to-day experience of a developer is like, because I think they have this mental model, which is highly simplified of, somebody who comes in and they sit down and they put their hands on their keyboard and they type for 8 hours, right? And they have lines of code that they produce and it's this very linear, format, right? And nothing could be further from the truth. The act of being a software developer is fundamentally to be stumped most of the time. So if you're not stumped, you can write code all day, but that's not what you're getting paid for. You're getting paid for the moment where you don't know what to do next. You have to stop, you have to think about all the context, you have to iterate on it, meaning you have to make a guess, and then you wait for feedback. And then best case scenario, you cross your fingers and you get a different error message than the one you got before, right? Yeah. That means you've moved forward and you can iterate on the next problem. That's what it means to be a developer. So that means we have to reduce their cognitive load, right? We have to make sure all the context is available to them so they're not going somewhere else. Yeah. We have to make sure they're staying in their flow state, right? So they're not context switching, which is a majorly expensive operation for a developer. And then we make sure those feedback loops are as short as possible so that I don't have to wait for something to go all the way out to my AppSec team and back. I don't have to wait for a CI/CD pipeline to stop something that I could have caught in my IDE. And I certainly don't have to call somebody on the phone and say, is this really an issue? You say it's a critical, but I kind of don't think it is because of vibes, right? How can we put all of that together to enable both sides to trust each other more, right? And build trust within organizations among security, developers, and by the way, all of these new stakeholders around AI-based tools that may or may not even have the technical skill to know how to write code, but now they're creators of software because they're using AI agents to do it. So that's part of why we're kind of rebranding as an AI trust platform, which is still providing application security, but I think our message to the market is application security is becoming AI trust, right? You have to take that same set of capabilities and reimagine them for this new revolution in software development. So to get back to your question, if you're looking for opportunities to partner with Snyk, that's where I would say struggling with AI adoption, struggling with cultural challenges between developers and security,
communication gaps,
getting the right context to the right decision maker at the right time in a way they can take action on it.
Yeah, and I think also like the amount of time, right? I mean, hunting and finding the schemas and doing all of that, like if that's a major pain point for the customer, like our integration is built for that, like to be able to just get all that information. So those are the things you should be listening for, our partner friends out there. So I think there's a lot of great opportunities out there for you. So on that kind of same thread, I was curious, like, how do you help customers prioritize securing the application space over any other attack surfaces that are out there? Because there's a lot out there. I mean, we've seen there's a lot of vendors out there, so I mean it's tough to kind of get our stuff put front and center.
There definitely is. And I think it's difficult because, again, if you've built software for a lot of your career, some of this is just so natural that I can even struggle to articulate it, right? But I think fundamentally the application space is the most complex attack surface, right? You think about it as opposed to cloud security, right? And this is not a dig on any of our cloud security friends, but cloud security is about building walls, right? You understand what the APIs are doing, what the configuration is, and you build those walls a little bit higher than you think the attacker is going to be able to supplant. But application security is all about protecting people from tunneling underneath those walls to get into your castle. So it doesn't matter how high they are. You can raise your cloud security up to the maximum of your budget and still risk somebody coming in from underneath because it's a subterranean world down there of tunnels that are interconnected to each other in ways that you can't see. And application security at best gives you ground penetrating radar in one particular spot so you can extrapolate where some of those data flows are. So I don't know. I think about that as maybe the most interesting problem to solve, right? And it's also the one that, again, it leads to the most interesting cultural conversations, right, around how we think about complexity in organizations. Software is always getting more complex, but security is always chasing that bleeding edge. There's always a little bit of a gap.
It's a push-pull
between the complexity that you can introduce, that you can build into software. I like to say that security is not in the natural critical path of software development. I can do my job as a developer and never think about security once. And that's a problem, right? Because security's job then has to be to put some kind of stop gate. I have to artificially introduce security into my critical path. And that's where the friction comes from. So how do we think about getting closer to secure by design, right? Turning security teams from the gatekeepers into providers of guardrails, right? Really what they should be doing is drawing the map to say, here's the security posture of our organization. And then your platform engineering or your DevOps team paves the road. And developers ideally drive on that road and they don't have a desire to get off of it, right? Because it goes where they want to go and it carries them downhill. That's our ultimate panacea for AppSec, but that's a much more difficult problem than saying we're just going to beef up security at the edge, right? First of all, what's the edge anymore?
Yeah, exactly.
But second of all, even if you do that to its maximum extent, you're still missing the underlying complexity of your applications. And that's, I think, what's often most misunderstood about AppSec in comparison to those other kind of budget lines.
Really, really well said. Now, I want to pivot slightly just over to AI because, I mean, you spoke about it's a huge driver for a lot of our customer conversations that we've been having lately. But in what ways is AI influencing your customer security posture and buying decisions? And how is Snyk adapting its products or services to help them navigate those changes?
Yeah, that's a huge question.
I know,
so I divide it really kind of into two areas, right? And one is, and it's probably not even news anymore, right? Going back 2 or 3 years now, what I'll call AI accelerated development, right? This is the use of coding assistants and co-pilots and the cursors and windsurfs of the world to either, write code for me or to drastically improve my productivity as a developer. Now, jury's still out on exactly how much it improves that productivity over the long term. It's obvious in the short term, right? I didn't have code, I prompted something in natural language, and now I have code. How maintainable is it? How secure is it? It turns out not very. And not because of any particular fault. I'm not singling out any of these tools, right? But because they are LLMs at their core, they are based on a corpus of training data, which comes from human developers. who introduce a lot of vulnerabilities.
Yes.
So it's almost like in order to make these tools good at what they do, you have to accept a certain amount of risk because there is vulnerability inherent in any training data you could throw at it.
Right.
The alternative would be to say, we're only going to train in a small data set that we know to be secure, and then they're not functional as code generators,
Exactly.
right? So you need another kind of technology to backstop that. That one is pretty ubiquitous in almost every organization now, whether you know it or not, by the way. If you don't think your developers are using coding assistants and AI technologies, you're wrong. They're just not telling you about it. And that is the bigger issue. So securing that process. But on the plus side, that is more of a quantitative problem, right? It's the same kinds of vulnerabilities that we've been dealing with for now 25 odd years in AppSec. They're just coming at you at a 10x or 100x rate because it's machines that are generating them. So you need SAST and DAST and SCA, and you need them integrated into these AI surfaces. So it's much more about the integration story, and it's much more about, again, the developer empowerment side of things. How can we enable both the new vibe coders or prompt engineers that are primarily coding in natural language with AI agents to understand security better and have guardrails, and at the same time, the core engineers that actually have to dive deep into the stack, understand how it all works, right?
Yeah.
Like make changes at deeper and deeper levels of complexity, and enable the security audience at the same time. So, if anything, that's the easier problem, right?
Yeah.
The second swim lane is what I call AI native development, and that is now this entirely new world of training models, of fine-tuning, of doing retrieval augmented generation, of building agents, building additional layers on top of foundational LLMs, for example. That is now a qualitative difference in the kinds of vulnerabilities that we're seeing. We have to think about prompt injection, model theft, right? We have to think about the hallucinatory aspects of non-determinism. All of these things that traditional AppSec tools, no matter how much you scale them, are not going to be able to detect because they're not designed for it, right? They're designed for deterministic code-based software. We now have software that fundamentally is a black box. Security loves nothing more than a black box that can't explain itself and that can't show its own work.
Right.
So we have to think about what is an AI security platform, or we often think about this as the difference between AI for security in the first case, how can we accelerate to meet the need of AI, versus security for AI in the second case, how can we create new solutions to secure the new tools that we're introducing. So we're also innovating, right? We're introducing things like an AI bill of materials generator that can show you all of the AI in use of your application, right? Doing things like red teaming of models, dynamic analysis of models, building a risk registry of LLMs and so forth. So our customers are kind of where we want to bring them along that journey, right? We would say, look, we do not know what the AI security market is going to look like in a year, let alone 3 to 5 years. Because we didn't know now what it was going to look like when we said at the beginning of 2025 that we were pivoting to an AI trust platform. So flexibility is a big part of that. Listening to customer feedback is a huge part, but remaining nimble and understanding that, like, as we stand now, everybody's talking about MCP servers, right? What if that's the Betamax of agent-to-agent communication, right? What if we move on to a new protocol tomorrow? We have to understand that this is a rapidly moving market, so the innovation strategy is almost as important as what we're doing in our core R&D as well. So it's a two-pronged approach, right? We want to meet our customers where they're at today with those traditional AppSec concerns, but accelerated to the speed of AI, and also saying we are innovating rapidly on these whole entirely new threat models that you're going to have to start integrating the more you're building AI native technology on top of your applications.
Really, really well said. Oh, man. It's a lot to digest right there, but I feel like there's nothing I could add to that because I feel like you captured it so perfectly. And so on that note, I think we're going to go, because you've given us so much good information. I want to know a little bit about you as a person, since we've got you on the show here. In security, it's important to be goal-oriented because our job really, it's never done. And I always feel like goals help us eat the elephant, really make a measurable difference in our world. And so can you share a personal or professional goal that you hope to achieve by the end of this year? And what inspired you to set this goal and how you're tracking towards it?
Well, yeah, I mean that's a weighty question. Right? I will say on the professional side, look, I try to think about what are the broad strategic implications of the way this market is changing. Right now, it doesn't mean I have to get everything right. As a matter of fact, I think a 50% rate is pretty good. But what I want to do is think about, like, how do we consider the journey of a developer over the long term, right? And there's a lot of conversation now about like, well, is AI going to put software developers out of business, right?
Never.
I don't think that's true. Well, if you look at the history of technology, right?
Right.
Every time a machine comes along to do the work of a group of engineers, the headcount of engineers goes up as a result, not down. Now, why is that? Half of those engineers decide, I'm going to learn to use this machine really well, right? I'm going to generate much more work with it. The other half of those engineers say, you know what? That machine's going to break eventually. And I'm going to learn how to fix it.
Yes.
Because then I'll continue to be in demand. I think that's exactly what we're seeing with AI. Half of developers are moving in this direction of becoming prompt engineers, vibe coders, and the other half are saying, boy, I really need to know how this stuff works on the back end so that I can be the one who remains in demand when inevitably, particularly with a non-deterministic machine that's a black box, right? I can be the one to learn to fix it. So what I'm trying to do kind of professionally is to chart out that process, to think more meaningfully about how that journey works, and also to hold myself to account to get into some of these workflows. I just spent probably more money than I should admit in a podcast on a nice GPU. And I'm running a lot of models locally now, and I'm trying to figure out like, how does that workflow evolve, and challenge myself to do more with some of these tools instead of just talking with them, about them all day with you.
Like, do you miss the old life a little bit?
Spinning castles
like,
in the air. I do a little bit, and for a while, I think I let my skill set I won't say stagnate, but I thought like, well, I mostly, I do podcasts for a living now, right? No, I think more strategically about the evolution of software development, but there is something about getting your hands on a keyboard and watching the output of some of these tools and to say, how can I make this better? But more importantly, how do I talk to other developers about it as an engineer to understand the very delicate place that we're in now, right? And try to build some confidence around that. So that's kind of my medium-term professional goal. I don't know how well I'm doing at it, but maybe we'll do this again in a year and we can check in.
It's a very noble goal, and I think it's admirable, and I think it's the right way to think about these things. I mean, we are on the bleeding edge. Things are changing rapidly, so I mean, it's honing that skill set, and I think will only make you better, especially as you do more thought leadership as you continue on your thought leadership tour here. So, Clinton, I want to thank you so much for being on the show today. I feel like tremendous amount of information that was just like, this is going to be very helpful for our partners, for our customers. I think the future of our partnership is very bright, and I'm just looking forward to for what comes next. So thank you again for showing up today.
Well, thank you so much for having me, Nick. Really enjoyed our conversation, and hopefully so now you know.
Exactly. So now I know. Partners, thank you, and we'll catch you on the next episode.